This lecture is based on Chapter 10 and is specifically on the causes of aggression. We had another basic lesson on aggression, but this is specifically on the causes of aggression. So a lot of similar information, but maybe a little different. The basic difference between being assertive and aggressive is how our words and behavior affect the rights and well-being of others. So as we did in the other PowerPoint, let's define aggression. Aggression is physical or verbal behavior intended to cause harm. There is physical aggression, which would be hurting someone's body. We probably can define that without having to define it. And social aggression, which would include things like bullying, even cyberbullying, insults, harmful gossip, or social exclusion that hurts someone's feelings. There's also excuse me, hostile versus instrumental aggression. Hostile aggression simply springs from I'm angry and I want to injure you. Instrumental aggression is a little more complicated. Aggressive behavior with a specific purpose in mind. Instrumental aggression is more planned out and coercive than other types of aggression. The goal is to influence or manipulate the particular outcome of a situation. Someone exhibiting this type of aggression has an underlying motive, for example, to sabotage someone, to gain status, or get something they want. So again, instrumental aggression is a bit more complicated than just being angry and wanting to injure someone, which is hostile aggression. So let's take another look and a reminder of what causes aggression. There are biological factors. Aggressive energy could be instinctive. In other words, it's innate and unlearned and universal. If this aggressive energy is not discharged, then it supposedly builds up until it explodes or until an appropriate stimulus releases it, like a mouse releasing a mousetrap. However, the However, the idea that aggression is instinctive also fails to account for the variations in aggressiveness from person to person and culture to culture. However, aggression is sometimes rooted in basic evolutionary impulses. Throughout much of human history, men especially have found aggression adaptive. Purposeful aggression improved the odds of survival and reproduction. Also, researchers have found brain neural systems in both animals and humans that facilitate aggression. When scientists activate these brain areas, hostility increases. When they deactivate them, hostility decreases. So in other words, calm animals can thus be provoked into rage and raging animals into submission, usually by stimulating the hypothalamus. So perhaps sometimes it's just their brain. That when something is stimulated, we can be more aggressive. So beyond biological factors of aggression, there are also chemical factors. Alcohol consumption is associated with higher levels of aggression, especially we've found among men. Alcohol enhances aggressiveness by reducing people's self-awareness, by focusing attention on provocations, and by reducing their self-control. Boys and men with high testosterone levels are more prone to delinquency, hard drug use, and aggressive responses to provocation, and increases in testosterone levels correlate with increases in aggression. So there's biological factors to aggression and there's chemical factors. There's also something called the frustration aggression theory. If you look at the little chart on the right, it kind of explains the process of the frustration aggression theory. First, there's a stimulus or a situation or a person who causes feelings of frustration by blocking us from getting to a goal. At that point, we have the urge to behave aggressively because we're frustrated and we're being blocked from reaching a certain goal. We have the urge to behave aggressively. Then that produces an aggressive behavior, which acts as an emotional release. So we get frustrated, then we have this desire or urge to be aggressive, and then we do the behavior, which kind of releases those emotions of frustration. There's also displacement, which says the aggressive energy brought on by frustration does not need to explode directly against its source, but most people learn to inhibit direct retaliation, especially when others might disapprove or punish. Instead, we displace or redirect our hostilities to safer targets. And you can see an example of that by looking to the left. Displacement is the transfer of negative emotion from one person or thing to an unrelated person or thing. So, for example, I'm at work, the boss shouts at me. I don't take it out on the boss because perhaps that would not be a good thing, obviously, but I go home and I shout at my husband. I displace the aggression onto someone else, and that helps the aggression release itself, but not against the person that made you angry. Relative deprivation refers to the perception of being worse off compared to others in a specific social context. This feeling can arise when individuals compare themselves to others who have more wealth, status, or opportunities, and that can lead to feelings of frustration and discontent. And I included all the social media things right there because I think with Facebook and Instagram and all those things, we really tend to compare ourselves to others. Of course, the pictures on Facebook, everyone looks perfect, and so we compare our lives to that, and that can really create some aggression when we feel like someone else's life is just quote better than ours. So I think that's a great example of relative deprivation. There's also social learning theory. Individuals can acquire new behaviors not only through direct experience, but also by watching others and seeing the consequences of their actions. Physically aggressive children tend to have had physically punitive parents who discipline them by modeling aggression with screaming, slapping, and beating. So we tend to model the behavior that we're shown. We learn through other individuals' behaviors. Being in physical or psychological pain can heighten aggression, and according to the textbook, there actually seems to be a correlation between a hot environment and aggression. However, this has not been proven. Being attacked or insulted is especially likely to provoke aggression. I think that's pretty obvious that when we're insulted or physically attacked, that's gonna provoke some anger and aggression. The weapons effect is a behavioral phenomenon in which the mere presence of a weapon can increase aggression. The mere presence of a gun, perhaps, could increase aggression. Also, social psychologists report that viewing fictional scenes of a man overpowering and arousing a woman can A, distort men's perceptions of how women actually respond to sexual coercion, and B, increase men's aggression against women. So that's another possible source of aggression. As we've learned from previous chapters and lectures, groups can amplify aggressive reactions partly by diffusing responsibility. And we've discussed diffusion of responsibility several times. That's essentially the larger the group, the more anonymous I become. And so, therefore, the less responsibility I feel. So, those are some various causes of why we feel aggressive. If you have any questions about that, you feel free to reach out.